Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Red and White Authority, episode number 4. I'm Art Regner along with Kevin Allen, and we are, of course, talking about the Detroit Red Wings. And Kevin, let's begin. Maybe not the weekend series that we thought. I almost thought I jinxed them last show when I said they only had 15 losses. We thought that they'd be pretty good against Calgary, who was impressive and took it to the Red Wings. But something happened this past weekend, which had not happened during the regular season. The Red Wings, for the first time, lost back-to-back games in regulation at home against Calgary on Friday, and then a Sunday afternoon affair, which was really early on Sunday, a 12:30 face-off against the Boston Bruins. They came back. They did what they usually do against the Edmonton Oilers lately, win that game. But is there a little bit of an alarm of concern? I mean, granted, it's impressive that it took them 60-some-odd games to lose back-to-back in regulation, yet at this time of the year, you don't want to start, I guess, having any bad habits.
Well, I would agree with that, but if you look at some of the top teams in the league, like I think Montreal and Nashville have been the two most consistent teams, and Nashville has gone through exactly the same thing that the Red Wings just went through over the weekend. Nashville had a run of poor play. And I thought it was interesting that Mike Babcock talked about the team just had sort of a case of the blahs, which is, and I think it's pretty common when you get into February and March when, the playoffs are still just a little bit too far away, and yet you're late in the season, you've played a lot of games, they're not, it should be enough motivation to try to win first place, but they're in the playoffs. So I think it's just human nature that you hit some kind of psychological wall, and you cannot, as much as fans, you would want every team to play at its highest level for all 82 games. It's really an impossibility. I don't see, with the exception of maybe Scotty Bowman's a great team for Montreal in the 70s, I don't know too many teams that have played exceptionally well in all 82 games. And I think that's what happened. If you look at the way the team played, Calgary, very hungry team, a team that's still working to get in the playoffs, has been trying to overcome Mark Giordano's injury. A scrappy bunch. They came in and played well enough to win that game. And then Boston, fighting for its playoff lives, a little hungrier than the Red Wings, who don't feel that same level of desperation. Played well or better than the Red Wings. And it didn't sound to me like Mike Babcock is alarmed because he's been through this. He knows this team well. And I think, as he said, I've seen some good things, but I've also seen some bad things. So I don't think it is a cause for alarm at this point.
Well, I find it interesting because if you look at it, what Babcock said truly was, I just had, if there was a little screen there, one of the cats just moved and knocked something over, so the tape kind of shit there. Sorry about that. But Henrik Zetterberg seemed to be getting frustrated. And on the bench, they showed him a couple times during the Boston game, and he doesn't like to lose, obviously, and he was kind of shaking his head and not imploring the troops to get going. But is this now where leadership comes in, on the ice leadership? I don't know what a coach can do to continually motivate their team. I mean, that's what they do through all 82 games, is somehow try to get through the guys and tell them what to do and put them in the best position to win. But is this where we really will see now the leadership of specifically a Zetterberg, maybe a Cromwell? Datsuk kind of leads in his own, Datsukian way, shall I say. But is this where leadership really pulls them out of this because we know the talent's there, they know what they're capable of doing. It's just now they have to get through that mental hurdle.
Yeah, well, I think that's why Zetterberg is the captain. To try to deal with these type situations. I gotta believe there was also a frustration level with the Red Wings over the fact that they had played pretty well for an extended period of time, and yet they couldn't make up any ground on Montreal or the Tampa Bay Lightning, because the Lightning have played well just right alongside the Red Wings. So it's been really difficult. I mean, each time the Red Wings would win a game, I'm sure they'd look the next or that night and figure out that Montreal and Tampa Bay were winning on the same nights they were. So I think there is a little bit of frustration. But Zetterberg and Datsuk have been through this before. They understand the blahs. I don't know if they call them that, but they certainly understand what teams go through, the ebbs and flows of it. And I would assume that both of those players will lead by example in the next game. And I'm sure Zetterberg will have some words to say even before the game. Datsuk, that's not his style, but Hank will talk to the troops.
When you look at this Detroit team, and specifically, Jimmy Howard was in net, and then the Monster was in net. Now he's injured again, I guess. I'm not sure what the latest is on him. I know that they recalled Peter Mrazek just maybe as a just in case. But one thing that if you look at some of the goals were kind of funny, odd bounces. I mean, the puck takes weird bounces, but they seem to be going through the goalie, which every time any NHL goalie I've ever talked to says, when a puck is getting through a goaltender, meaning that they don't know exactly where the puck is, they don't have a feel for that. Is that because Jimmy is still kind of working his way through injury? And for that matter, so is Gustafsson. I mean, they've both been hurt. Is that a cause of alarm? Because here in Detroit, Kevin, everybody looks at the Red Wings. Whenever the goalie gives up any type of goal, they never give up a good goal. It's always a bad goal.
No, that's right.
Right now, the keys. Jimmy was having a great time, but since he's been back, he's stopped a lot of shots. The Red Wings have been giving up a lot of shots lately. It's not that he's horrible. It's just that he just doesn't look to be the same goalie. And then Gustafsson, I mean, when he's in there, he plays pretty well, but he always seems to be hurt.
Yeah, and it all comes down to expectations. We've talked about this in previous shows. The fact when Mrazek comes up, it's the backup quarterback for the Lions, where you always believe that guy is better than the existing quarterback. Why not give him a shot when things aren't going well? And Mrazek, when he was here, was pretty impressive in his ability to fight through, but he would give up goals early, and he gave up some bad goals. But we don't have the same level of expectation. He's a younger goalie rising up, and Howard is the established goalie. But I don't think he's been quite as sharp as he was earlier in the season since he's come back, and he's probably still feeling his way through. I think for a goalie, coming back from injury is harder than it is for a regular player, because I think they do get in a rhythm where they feel confident. For goaltending, it's like it is about confidence, and I think Howard felt pretty good about himself, and then he got injured, and then he came back, and you got to sort of rediscover your mojo. You got to rediscover your confidence, and I think he's still not quite at the level where he was before he left. But there's still enough time for him to get that back and get sharp. And the one thing that I've learned from covering the game for a long time too, there's really no correlation. Like, you always talk about you want to be playing well at the end of the season, and yet I've seen the Red Wings that have been playing poorly at the end of the regular season and do really well in the postseason, and I've seen them be super all the way down to the very end and then lay an egg in the postseason. So even though human nature and the logic tells you should want to be playing at the highest level, sometimes there's really no connection between the two.
Well, right, and I think sometimes what we have a tendency to forget is that they really are human beings, and they're not like these super robot kind. It's not like we're watching the Jetsons or something where they're all made by sprockets or something, and they're gonna cogs or something. They go on command, and that there's ups and downs. And I don't know, maybe when a group of athletes are together, a malaise might hit them all at once. They're all trying, and the monotony of being a professional athlete, and it is kind of monotonous at times. Maybe that's what Babcock was referring to as far as doldrums go. Is that they're trying, but almost collectively they've all kind of gone into this slow period.
Well, speaking of, Scotty Bowman used to remind me of Mr. Spacely a little bit. The way he kind of wandered around. But anyway, I think Mike Babcock, I didn't go down to practice today, but I read the story, and it seemed like, I believe it was today, where they were cooking some ribs, and everybody came in, and they were trying to take advantage of the nice weather, and I think they were trying to break up the monotony a little bit. Franzen was in, and he's been showing up for the past week. He brought his kid in. They still don't have a timetable for him, but Darren Helm is supposed to going to be back within a few days, and I think to me that was an indication that they are trying to break up the monotony a little bit, just to get everyone back. And I think getting Helm back is really going to make a difference, because his speed sort of changes everything. The Red Wings are a fast team with or without Helm. But when they got Helm, that's just one more dangerous weapon. And I think they've become so accustomed to his disruptive aspects of his game in terms of him changing the way the other team plays, that when he's not there, it's had a little bit of an impact. Like, they don't need him to score every game, but they need him to create havoc every game, and he does that because of his speed. And he usually gets a couple or three chances, a few break-ins, or some partial breakaways. So I think getting him back will help. But it does get to be a little bit monotonous, and I know fans don't want to hear that because guys make good money. But it's just hard to maintain it at a high level. But the issue is that you don't want to get too far away from where it is you need to be, because it's hard to get back once you get it. And we just talked about that with Howard. He was hurt for an extended period and sort of lost his rhythm, and now he's trying to regain it back. So, I think if you're Mike Babcock, you hope everybody just sort of takes a deep breath after what happened. They've lost 2 in a row, and then regulation. They won again against Edmonton, and now you hope, okay, now we're back on the road to where we need to be.
Well, I find it, Darren Helm is one of these players that he is a difference maker from the aspect because of speed. And I think if you look at the Red Wing forward core, he really brings that dimension. I mean, the Red Wings are a pretty fast team. Don't get me wrong; they're pretty quick. But Helm seems to have a gear that's extremely impressive. And as we talked about, his unrestricted free agency, or where he's at in his contract, you can almost see him being out of this lineup. And this is the first time he had played every game up until recently getting hurt, where you can see that there might be a market for Darren Helm. Although I'm pretty sure the Red Wings are going to do everything within their power to try to get him to some long-term deal.
Yeah, well, and you could see the recruitment pitch, too, if it came to that, too, because you know what they're going to say. On the Red Wings, you've been a depth player, you've been a third liner, and I mean, and the Red Wings will counter, well, you were playing with Datsuk this season, but, they're going to, talk about giving him more opportunity and power play time and that sort of thing. So, you can understand if Helm wanted just to explore his free agency. So I agree with you. I think he would be an intriguing free agent, but we all know Ken Holland's history of getting guys re-signed at the proper time, and the way the CBA works, you got to get within a year of their contract before you can start negotiating. And I gotta believe players like playing in Detroit once they've been here. Seldom do guys leave when the Red Wings want him to stay. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think they'll get him signed. But I think he's proven how valuable he is this season when he's been able to stay healthy. I think it's really made a difference for this team, particularly because of the elements he brings fits into the way this team is now. The Red Wings have always been a great puck possession team, but nobody ever said, hey, the Red Wings are a fast team. They've had some fast players, I mean, obviously, but they weren't a speed team. They were a possession team. But I think this team, with Nyquist and Tatar, and with Helm and Clendening, I mean, this is a quick skating team, and Helm just adds to that, and he really fits into this group, and I think Datsuk has enjoyed having him as well, just for that added speed.
Kevin, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I wanted to address this right now because it involves a player whom now appears to be in Mike Babcock's doghouse. Did not have a good game, especially against the Boston Bruins, and that's Stephen Weiss. But it seems that Nick Kypreos is either intent or obsessed with sending Dion Phaneuf to the Detroit Red Wings. And keeps saying over and over, hey, look, they're going to revisit this. They're going to revisit this. Now, I don't want to get into speculation. We're going to have plenty of shows where we're going to be able to actually talk about this. But let's look at it this way. I mean, I know we've mentioned it. Is Kypreos just trying to keep the fires alive, or do you think that there is something to it? In part of this deal, if Dion Phaneuf has become a Detroit Red Wing, is that they're going to Brendan's going to have to take on, Brendan Shanahan is going to have to take on the contract of a Stephen Weiss. Do you think that that's where they're at, which is kind of ironic considering that Mike Babcock really wanted Stephen Weiss in a Red Wing uniform and was not a big fan, even though he's kind of slipped off the radar in Tampa, Val Filppula.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, I mean, I would assume Nick Kypreos has sources in Toronto, and I think the Toronto Maple Leafs probably see Detroit as a good fit. And I still believe much depends on what happens to the Red Wings in the playoffs. If this defense, holds up and plays well, and the Red Wings make an extended run, I think Phaneuf seems less attractive. He's only because he costs a lot of money, and he's certainly not a perfect defenseman. But if it doesn't play well, and you start to think, okay, we want to sort of change the look of our defense, and boy, Dion Phaneuf, we don't believe he's a top pairing defenseman, but we certainly would like the look of him in our second group, in our second pairing. He brings some meanness, which the Red Wings don't have enough of on the blue line. And he has, he's a decent offensive player with a big shot, and I think it would be, it would be intriguing to them. But at $7 million, and I know Ken Holland is always fond of saying, I like player X at $3 million. At $7 million, I don't like him so much. So I would say Phaneuf, they like him at five, maybe even $5.5 million, but they don't like him at a $7 million cap hit for an extended period. Now, if you take Stephen Weiss's contract out of that equation going back, well, then it doesn't feel like a $7 million. So there's some logic to all that, but I think much of it will depend on. I think the Red Wings are not thinking about Dion Phaneuf. I don't think he is their master plan, but I think if the Red Wings don't perform well in the playoffs, I think they'll take a look at that.
Well, I think it's interesting. I don't know if Dion Phaneuf is part of the Red Wings master plan, but it certainly seems like it's part of Nick Kypreos' master plan.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. He doesn't seem to let it go. I mean, he does move on, and I'm not trying to criticize Nick Kypreos here, but everyone thought, well, trade deadline's over, everyone's moving on. Although, again, Toronto just seems to be such a mess that you've got to believe that this offseason that what they weren't able to accomplish at the trade deadline is something that they're going to do during the offseason, which is kind of unload contracts and try to build from the ground up. I mean, I think it'll be interesting either way. But with that said, let's turn our attention to the Red Wing forward core. We looked at the defense last episode of the Red and White Authority, episode 3. In episode 4, let's look at the forwards. And specifically, Kevin, everyone is worried, obviously, about the Red Wings because they not talked about it. Yet, if you look at the last several playoff runs, where Detroit has really struggled is scoring goals.
Yeah.
Last year, Nyquist and Tatar, who were having good rookie, seasons, his first time in the league players, found out how difficult it was. Tatar's in a little bit of a rut. Nyquist is kind of in a rut too. They're not scoring goals quite at the pace that they have. Is this alarming? And do you see, again, when we look at this forward core, even though it's kind of scoring by committee, but I looked at it, Henrik Zetterberg through injury hasn't scored 20 goals since 2012 now, and Datsuk is at 20 because he's starting to play again. But, their heyday was from about 2004 to about 2010 for Z. I mean, as far as goal scoring, getting 30 goals or 25, whatever. And Datsuk is pretty consistent. So I'm just saying, is Father Time catching up with those two guys, meaning that once the playoffs start, these young guns are going to have to start scoring some goals or this team could be in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's pressure on those two to score. I think last season was excusable because they were young players. They have to figure it out. It's become a cliche to say the playoffs are a second season, but it really is, and it's different. The Pittsburgh Penguins didn't advance last season because Sidney Crosby couldn't score. Sidney Crosby, as we all know, even in Detroit, is a terrific player, but he had trouble scoring goals because in the playoffs there's no room out there. And when you're younger players, smaller players like Nyquist and Tatar, you got to work that much harder. I wouldn't be concerned about the way it's gone in the regular season, because as I always like to point out, in an 82 game season, if you're a 30 goal scorer and you got one per game, you go 52 games without scoring any goals. It's just the way it works. But they do have to prove they can score in the postseason, because I think this team is capable. Like, it's a pretty deep team now when everybody is healthy. And I think they are capable of winning by scoring by committee. Clendenning is almost at 10 goals. I think he's got 9 now. They have guys on the third and fourth line that can contribute significantly offensively. So it's not totally on the shoulders of Tatar and Nyquist, but as Mike Babcock is fond of saying, you can't be successful in the postseason unless your best players are your best players. Well, in Detroit, the Red Wings know that Tatar and Nyquist are their best scorers. I mean, they're natural scorers. They're pure scorers, and they're not going to be successful if those guys have no goals in the postseason, because Nyquist or Zetterberg and Datsuk are still consistent players, but their best seasons, as you pointed out, are behind them. They shouldn't be counted on to do all of the heavy lifting in the postseason, not at their age.
No, they should. I mean, look at it. I mean, I really like the fact that Zetterberg gives you everything he has. Datsuk is so wonderfly talented, and really, as far as skill level goes, there's very few players that can really rival him. I mean, he does things you can tell. My favorite story about Pavel Datsuk is in the heyday of the Detroit-Colorado rivalry. There was a moment where he did something, stole the puck from Adam Foote or danced around him, made Foote look foolish, and his foot was skating back to the Colorado bench. He looked over at the Detroit bench and just shook his head and started laughing and said, well, there's nothing we can do about that, and they all kind of laughed, which, kind of shows you kind of the camaraderie that's on the ice, too. I mean, these guys understand it, they get it, and they're more than willing, the old expression of tipping your cap to the opposition when they do something, and Pavel has not lost that. I mean, he still does remarkable things, but, as you said, with Father Time catching up on this, and Kevin, you and I know this as well as anybody. I mean, the mind is always there. It's sometimes the body isn't willing, and eventually, as great as they have been, Datsuk and Zetterberg really do have to pass the torch. Now, I find what's interesting about it is when we talked a little bit about Nyquist and Tatar, but maybe the key to this Red Wings one, I mean, they have to score. I think we know that. Are maybe your mid-level Red Wings, which would be a healthy Darren Helm, and a Justin Abdicator, who, has 17 goals now, come out of nowhere. Abdicator's a gritty player. He's not the biggest guy, but he's certainly pretty tough. And obviously, as we've talked about, Helm's speed brings a different dimension, especially on Datsuk's line, because he opens up the ice for him, and Datsuk creates. So, when we look at this forward four, and there's a lot of ifs and everything, but perhaps maybe the two key components could be Darren Helm and Justin Abdicator.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, well, yeah, the way I view the Red Wings up front is this. Like, to me, there's just like, with the economy, there are economic indicators of how the economy's going. To me, there are Red Wing indicators. And the one of them that I always note is when Zetterberg is controlling the puck, and nobody protects the puck as well as Zetterberg. The only guy that I've ever seen that was, this better than Zetterberg at protecting the puck was Forsberg. He was so balanced on his skates, you could never get the puck off him. And when the Red Wings are going well, we've all seen it, and those of us in Detroit, he carries the puck deep in the corner, he stops, he shifts back, guys are chasing him, he hangs on to the puck, he protects it with his body, and then he skates behind. And this goes on for like 15 or 20 seconds, and then suddenly he emerges, and he makes a play out of that. When the Red Wings are playing well, that's always evident. You need to see Zetterberg in the middle of the action, and I think everybody feeds off that. I think they really do. But I also think there's some, X factors, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. When you have Abdicator in the center of the action, and you're right. I mean, he's not the most gigantic guy in the world, but he is very physical, and when he's present, like when he's in front of the net, when he's battling, when you see him in the corners, when he's jumping, the Red Wings are engaged. Like he's an indicator to me. Like when he is surging, he is a real X factor for this team. And this season, he's scoring and he's getting. He's had a few power play goals. He's got 17 goals. I mean, he looks like a real big factor, and that's important because, the days of having guys like Robitaille and Brett Hull in your third lines, Hall of Fame scores. Those days are gone now. They don't have the level of talent on the wings they once had. So you have to have guys like Abdicator. And then the third element, I would say, is Darren Helm's speed. Like he changes this team. Everybody on his line has to skate a little faster to keep up with him, and I think it to motivate you. I think he brings them along, and when he's healthy and he's playing all the time, and I think the other team has to change to accommodate his speed. And the way they match up things is different. They got to have guys up there who can keep up with him because they know he's a breakaway waiting to happen. Where is he? Is he in the top 5, 6, 7 fastest guys in the league? I gotta believe he is. Maybe if you timed him, who knows? Maybe he's in the top 50, but it sure feels like he's in the top handful of players in the league.
The thing I like about him, I think, is his acceleration. He seems to hold. It just takes a couple of strides, and he's, in the strength sense, almost he's not the player that Sergei Fedorov was, but Sergei could accelerate from 0 to 100 in a stride. I mean, it was amazing that he had, and it seems that Helm has the same push off, I guess. I mean, when he wants to turn it up, it doesn't take much for him to be going full tilt. Another player that I've been impressed with since he's been at Red Wing, and I knew he was a good player, and but with him being in the Eastern Conference for most of his career, was Erik Cole, and I think he's adjusted very, very well, Kevin, to the Red Wings in a short period of time, and I think it's because he has that one aspect that I think that all Red Wings have to have to play any long period in Detroit, and that is intelligence, a hockey sense, a thing for the game. I mean, he hasn't played with the Red Wings very long, but he seems to know exactly where to go on the ice and to make himself open. And I think his passing is pretty underrated. With Erik.
Yeah, I mean, Erik Cole is a real good fit, for this team. Zedlichi is, was sort of born to play for the Red Wings puck possession game, but Erik Cole, fits just as well. And first of all, he still has the speed to keep up with the team, and he's strong on the wing. And you're absolutely right on the money. And his, he's a savvy player. Like he's played in enough systems that he understands without having to work at it how to fit in and do the job that he's required to do. And I would knowing Erik, and I've covered him for a long time, and I've known him back from when he was in Carolina. He's just got to be thrilled to be part of a contending team because he's a guy that just wants to win. High character guy too, and I think that's important for the Red Wing organization. You rarely hear there's ever any problems in the Red Wings dressing room, and that's by design. They do a real good job of ferreting out, who are the character players that you want in. They don't want any trouble in their room or, off the ice. And so they do make sure that they get those kind of players, and Cole fits in. And then the other element too, and we spoke about this the last time, but it bears repeating, because I think the Red Wings have decided that they do need to have some more grit and toughness, and Cole provides that. Like, now I see him as the fourth piece to that puzzle. Eriksson can provide some of that, and he shows a willingness to stand up for his teammates. He's a big-bodied guy. He can push players aside in the defensive zone. Abdicator has shown a enthusiasm for the project. He's there to defend his teammates, and he's got just enough size. Like, he is not 6'4", but he's a good, solid player over 200 pounds who you feel him when he hits you. Then they have Riley Sheehan, who's a bigger-bodied player who I don't think has explored all of his toughness yet. But I think he's a handful. He's a wide load to deal with. And now you have Eric Cole, who is a power forward, who makes sure that he can make his pounds count. So, and I think that was important for the Red Wings. I think being in the Eastern Conference, it is just slightly different than being in the West. I think you do have to sort of take advantage of all the grittier guys that you have just because of the way the game's played over here.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I really think, and you touched upon it, Kevin, is that I think with Eric Cole on this team, now I don't know, I know he's unrestricted, I don't know what the Red Wings are going to do next season, and a lot of we keep alluding to depends on how well they do during the playoffs. But I think the player that might really benefit from having Eric Cole on this team would be Riley Sheahan, who can learn how to use his body to his maximum advantage in the NHL, because Riley Sheahan is a pretty good player, and he's able to, I think he's able to pick things up. I mean, Jeff Jackson told me Notre Dame he already knew how to play defense. They wanted him to be more of an offensive player, and lo and behold, he became that. So I think when I look at Riley Sheahan, whom I've always admired and thought was a good player, he's kind of, I'm not going to say a late bloomer, let's say a mid bloomer as far as go. And I think that Eric Cole being on this team is going to benefit him greatly.
I would agree with that, and I would say that Sheahan really doesn't know how skilled he is. Like I think he has sort of viewed himself as a third liner. That's what they said when they drafted him. They expected him to be in that third line role as sort of the checking center with enough skill to contribute some goals. But I think he may be better than that. I think, to me, he's a two-center. We've seen him just make some exceptional plays. I can't remember what team it was against, but, he was coming down the right-hand side, and he pulled the puck back and just made this nice, shot high into the net. It was a real scorer's goal. And we've seen some plays. His passing is much better than I think scouts anticipated it would be. He's a real playmaker. I've seen him on a 45, 50-foot pass to Nyquist that set him up for a perfect goal. And I remember when he made it, I thought, that's the top 10, 15% of the centers that can make that play. There was a lot of traffic, and he had to hold the puck a little bit longer to wait for Nyquist to get clear, and then he snapped it, through traffic and bodies and got it on, and it was a good head man of the puck. So I agree. Having a guy like Eric Cole, who's another big player who can still play a speed game, and Sheahan skates really well. I think he's turned out to be a real find, and it really just kind of fits into the whole legacy of Detroit scouting, which is as we find players that turn out to be a little better than everybody thought they were going to be.
Well, when they drafted Riley Sheahan, I remember going up to Jim Nill, and I said to him, I go, you've got a really good player there, a really good player. And he looked at me kind of smirked and said, yeah, I know. I drafted him. Of course I know he's good. And when you look at it from that aspect, I can remember as a freshman at Notre Dame had a lot of injuries on the blue line, and he stepped in as a true freshman. He played in a season series against Michigan, and he was able to, without question, he stepped in and scored a goal and assisted on another one, and it really became this a good player. I remember the first game was in Ann Arbor that I covered. The second game was a Sunday afternoon game in South Bend, and going down to South Bend, I can remember everybody telling me that this kid from Toronto, but Riley Sheahan was a really, really good player, yet he never realized how good he was. And Jeff Jackson, his head coach at Notre Dame, has told me repeatedly whenever we brought Riley Sheahan up, he has kept saying over and over, he came in here wanting to play defense. That's what he wanted to do. He knew how to play it, and I keep begging him to shoot. So, here's a guy who, as I said, his learning curve, he doesn't have a learning curve. He's already there. He just doesn't know it yet, and, which is maybe the most difficult transition. I know it's confidence and belief in yourself, and I think when you talk to Sheahan, he always talks about being confident in himself. I think once and you can see it. does seem a little more right now. And I really do think that when we look back 2 years, that's the guy that's diamond in the rough.
Yeah, you know, but you raise a really good point about sometimes the difference between being a good goal scorer and a great goal scorer is just an added layer of confidence. And like we really see that with Johan Franzen. Like I think Johan Franzen resists the thought that he is a big-time goal scorer. I think he dislikes that tag. Like he doesn't see himself in that regard. And I do think that's you know, one of the roadblocks to his consistency. That you know, I think the Red Wings and his teammates view him like that, but he has had difficulty you know, crossing over. And again, you know, we talked about human nature before, but I think that's true in this case. You know, and no matter what profession you're in order to succeed, you've got to believe first in yourself. It's not whether others believe in you. Sometimes you just got to believe in yourself. And I'm not sure that Johan Franzen has ever viewed himself as, you know, as capable of a goal scorer as, you know, we see him, you know, to be. And it's been a big difference. And I think, you know, Darren Helm is another one who I think he saw himself early as, you know, a guy that was going to be a role player. And now I think he's just sort of exploring the idea that, okay, you know, maybe I am the player I was in junior, because all these players are scorers in junior. And then, you know, and then they come up and right away they sort of get cast as what they're going to be. And then they've got to, you know, to break out of that, they've got to do more. You know, so, and speaking of Darren Helm, the story I have about Darren Helm is about when he came up in his rookie season. We were in the playoffs covering him, and I wanted to do a story about the possibility that Helm might be one of the fastest players in the league. And so at the time he went in the trainer's room, and I was just waiting and waiting and waiting, and the players had come and gone, and I was really the only reporter left. And Darren Dreger of TSN walks by, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm waiting for Darren Helm." And he stopped and paused and said, "Kevin, that should be the title of your autobiography, Waiting for Darren Helm." And true, and I'm actually thinking that's what it is going to be, because, you know, basically it sort of sums up what a sports writer's life is all about, you know. So my autobiography, when I talk about covering the NHL for so long, is going to be entitled Waiting for Darren Helm.
Yeah, I think mine is going to be, if I ever write something like that, would be Waiting for Tim Taylor or something. You know? You're absolutely right. I mean, people think, well, wow, you get to talk to, you know, Steve Yzerman or so-and-so, and you do. You don't get me wrong, but, you know, you talk to everybody. I mean, you wait, you know, if you're working on something, you want to write something, you know, they're all the same in my eyes, you know, because there's a story behind each and every one of them, and, you know, and I think that's what's great about, you know, what we've been able to do, especially you, Kevin. I mean, obviously, you're a Hall of Famer, so you've you know, I can't wait to read your autobiography. Maybe I'll write one of those like the kids, something like that. When I look at this Red Wing team and I look at the forwards, and we've talked about different guys, you bring up Johan Franzen. I really do think that there's part of the Red Wing management, and I'm not sure that Mike Babcock would be part of this part of the management, that just thinks if Franzen is healthy, and I'm not saying that Babcock won't play him, don't get me wrong, but really have not given up on him. You know, if he's able to go, if he gets clearance, they want to put him in there because, as we said about before on the Red and White Authority, is that despite as frustrating as he is, at the end when they look at the stats for the end of the year, they kind of shake their head and say, you know, Mule scores goals. He scores goals, and they need someone to score goals in the playoffs.
Yeah, and he has a history of that. And the other thing about him is he's a big body, and you know, you don't think of Johan Franzen as you know, a heavy major hitter, but he is a big-bodied guy. And in the playoffs, you need those guys. It wears down the other team to have to deal with him because he's a big-bodied player who scores and goes to the net. and it wears them down. When he's going strong to the net, it wears down the opposition. It does. He does have an impact on the team, and I mean, I would agree. I mean, in the back of their mind, I mean, if you ask Mike Babcock about it, he would say, I can only deal with the players I have, and right now I don't have them. That's the standard operating line, and I get that because that's true. It's just sort of the idea if they're not here, they're dead to us. I mean, that's a little harsh, but that's the way they have to approach it. Next man up has to come up and do the job. That's how you succeed in the NHL. But in the back of everyone's mind, they're thinking, wow, if the mule can get back and start galloping, and if he's hot, because we've all seen it, in the postseason, he puts up Gordie Howe-like numbers sometimes over an 8 and 10 game span, and again, he's such a big player that changes the way the Red Wings look on the ice. So who knows? And I saw the every time he shows up and there's a report from the reporters, I'm always very interested. And I read the quotes about him, and he said when someone asked him how he's feeling, he said, "Better some days." Well, I don't know how to read into that, but he needs to feel better every day. Concussion. The best definition of what it's like to be facing a concussion came from the head medical officer of USA Hockey, Dr. Michael Stewart of the Mayo Clinic, whose son Mark plays for the Winnipeg Jets, and I've known him for a number of years. And I was asking him to describe, what he would tell an NHL player if he examined him about what he could expect in terms of returning to the lineup. And he said, "Well, what I tell everybody who has a concussion is, you'll be back up doing your regular chores sometime between 2 weeks and never." And the point is that everybody is different in facing concussions, and everybody reacts differently. And this has clearly been, in the Pat LaFontaine, Bukaboom, Sidney Crosby zone in terms of concussions. Crosby missed the better part of 2 seasons, and Franzen obviously has had multiple issues, just as Crosby had, and he has not been able to have the kind of recovery that you would hope for. But all that really means is his physical makeup in his brain is just different than other people's is all.
Right, and I agree with you. I mean, I'd like to see the mule come back and at least give it one more try, as long as. But you never know with those things, as you said. The doctor just said, from tomorrow to never, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Time. But when we look at the mule, besides him, let's look at some of the. I'm not going to say lesser forwards, but guys that if they chip it goals, like a Joachim Anderson who we talked about, many Red Wing fans still can't believe that he's on the team. You look at him, you look at Drew Miller, who chips in the odd goal, as we alluded to. There's a little bit of a mismatch here, but when you look at this forward core as this forward core as a collective, there's depth there certainly, Kevin, but does there have to be more consistency in goal scoring, even though they have a number of players that are in double digits as far as scoring?
Well, I mean, I think if you're Mike Babcock, you're hoping for more consistent effort out of the team as a whole. But the history of the NHL playoffs is different day, different hero. That's the way you win. Even if you look at the great Red Wing teams that have won championships, what made them interesting and successful is that some days it was Yzerman, some days it was the grind line, some days it was Nick Lidstrom, some days it was Ozzy. And that's the way you have success. And I think that's what the Red Wings hope that they have here, is a collection of players who all have that capability. Like even a guy like Yurko. Like, I think he's a fascinating cat on this team, and for this reason, like, would you be shocked if Yurko, if a couple of Red Wings went down and suddenly Yurko, who's a pretty skilled player with some size, suddenly gets promoted to the second line and then becomes the John Druce or Chris Kontos of this playoff? Like, he has the ability to do that. He's a highly skilled player with size. He could score some goals if he got a bunch of playing time, played with great players. He's certainly capable of doing that. Like, they have a highly skilled young player playing on the fourth line that could do that, and we've seen that in the postseason. Now, I think he has not proven that he deserves to get off the fourth line because, I'm sure his agent and Yurko would say, well, I'm getting fourth line playing time. It's only 10 minutes. It's hard to show what you can do. But players do escape off the fourth line by playing well in those 10 minutes, and he really hasn't done enough to sort of warrant that. But he's capable of that. And I think that's the hallmark of this team is that it is up and down the lineup. They have some interesting guys. Like, we haven't even talked about Polkanen. And, I don't even know if he's going to play in the postseason. But if he does, would anybody be shocked if suddenly he ends up with 6, 7, 8, 9 goals? I mean, he's capable of that. He's got a big shot. He knows where the scoring areas are. He knows how to slide into the seams in the defense. His release could be a little quicker, but he'll sort that out as he gets more games in. So that's the, I think, the intrigue of this Red Wing forward unit is it has a lot of guys with a lot of potential. Now, whether they can all kind of come together, who knows? But this is an interesting team. This is a fascinating bunch that they have up front. They don't, there's no, the two superstars they have, Zetterberg and Datsuk, are both on the back nines of their careers, and I don't think Nyquist and Tatar are quite to their level in terms of being able to carry a team. But we also know there's some unlimited potential for those two guys. But it really is a fascinating group.
Well, I look at it, and as I said, we've talked about Teemu Pulkkinen before, not in this podcast we haven't, but Ken Holland said we're going to have to make a decision on him. He's never going to clear waivers next year, so we're either going to trade him or he's going to be on our team. And I'm almost looking at this point that Yurko's future with the Red Wings, I think, depends on what Pulkkinen does and the decision they make on the end. Yeah. Because obviously Mickey Redmond seems enamored with him right now, but he did say something in the last telecast about he's going to have to learn that these 30-foot wrist shots or slap shots that he likes to take coming down like Brett Hall, you're not going to be that NHL because they can see the spot. And so, he's finding his way. Have you seen enough? And maybe you've already answered this. Do you think that, because I think where they're at right now, that if someone's going to be promoted and he's kind of already there, I think they're, at this point, auditioning Pulkkinen, and they're saying to Yurko, buddy, you've had opportunities. Now let's see you work your way back into our good graces.
Yeah, no, I've sort of changed my mind about Pulkkinen by watching him. I thought he was going to have a hard time breaking into this group. There are players who score at the AHL level that are not going to play in the NHL. And I had not seen enough of Pulkkinen at the AHL level, but I just thought, hey, it's a group that's pretty well established here. I like Yurko's potential, but now that I've watched Pulkkinen, I think he's going to make it. I think he can be a goal scorer. He has abilities that you cannot teach. You can take really good players and teach them how to be successful, but you can't take ordinary players and teach them how to be superstars. And I don't know that he can be a superstar, but I think he can be a scorer in the NHL. Just a shot. I mean, even the goal that he scored, his third goal, just a turnaround and it just rips it in the upper corner of the net. That takes some skill. There wasn't much net there, but he fired it right in like he knew exactly where he was going with it. And, he'll have to learn what works and what doesn't work, and he'll have to deal with much tighter coverage than he did in the AHL. Teams are now figuring out who he is, and the coach is reminding everyone that he scored 30 goals in the AHL, and the AHL is a pretty good league. So, he'll face, just like Nyquist and Tatar had to prove it, after they did it the first time when no one knew who they were. Now everybody knows who they were, and I think Pulkkinen. But I see him as a guy that is going to find a way to stick with this team. I don't think he's going to go, through waivers and end up a la, like Kyle Quincy did or some of the other guys.
Right, it's not going to be like Nestersil, who's now with Carolina.
Yeah.
I think if one thing I think that we've learned, or what the Red Wings now are going to say, is that we're tired of losing players through waivers, and if we're not going to be able, if we don't think a guy's going to make our roster, they're going to try to do everything within their power, I think, to move that player, and that's why it's to see what exactly they want to do as far as and I think Yurko right now is the odd man out. But only a couple of years ago, when Grand Rapids was winning the Calder Cup, Yurko was the guy that.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe Yurko art could be used if they decide to improve their blue line, for example, in the off season. Yurko to me seems like a candidate because teams are going to know he has potential. He has demonstrated at the AHL level that he has NHL skill, and I think we've seen glimpses of that.
Right,
here in Detroit, but he just has not been able to escape, the fourth line. And again, I think that'll all come down to, like, I would bet if we had him on this podcast, he would say, well, it's hard to break off the fourth line when you're not getting enough playing time. It's the old argument. The coach says you're not getting any playing time, or he's saying I'm not getting any playing time, and the coach is saying, well, you're not getting any playing time because you haven't shown me you deserved it. And he's saying, well, I can't show you that I deserve it because I'm not getting any playing time. So I would say that he probably doesn't see it the same way the Red Wings do. But who knows? I mean, he's still a young man. Like, a guy could get hurt, he could move up and show himself, and the next thing we'll be just raving about him.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, Mike Babcock, his favorite saying is that, look, I don't make their ice time; they make it.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, but I don't know that there's any other sport that has that where coaching really does impact, like a player's ability to, have an impact. Like, you get in the lineup in baseball, you have the same opportunity as everyone else. When you bat ninth, you get one fewer at bat, but you get up there against the pitcher, you get to say. The same thing in basketball. There's only 12 players on the team. You're only playing like 7 or 8 guys. You're going to have your time out there. But in hockey, the coach says when you go on the ice. If you stay too long, you won't get another shift. He chooses whether you're killing penalties or on the power play or not getting any special teams time. The coach really controls a player's ability to have impact in hockey like no other sport. It's just not the same as in other sports. So I can see the players who grow frustrated by that, but also Mike Babcock is exactly right. If you want to get more playing time, all you got to do is play better, because they still want to win, so they put the best players. Players are playing the best out on the ice.
Right, and Babcock is really upfront about that, and obviously within the organization, there's probably a little bit of different philosophies about which players they think are up and coming. Now, Kevin, I'm going to attempt, and all my Greek classes out there, because the majority of my family is Greek, Anastasiousis, maybe. Andreas, he scored a beautiful goal last night. Word out of Grand Rapids is that obviously if the Red Wings are looking at forward prospects right now, Dylan Larkin at the University of Michigan is front and center number 1.
Yeah.
Forwards. They're thinking that Anastasiou could be number 2. Mantha is teetering on. He could be a great player, or he could be an adequate player, or maybe not a player. Now, again, I don't want to throw alarm in there and say they're giving up on Mantha. I don't mean it that way, but that his learning curve is a little bit slower, and that Anastasiou is really coming on as well. I think I've now pronounced his name 3 different ways, but Larkin is right now the crown jewel, whom I affectionately call the Greek kid, is number 2, and then maybe Mantha.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the Greek kid, as you call him, is more advanced. He's closer to being ready. I think Mantha has shown up, and he is I think probably a little stunned that how much faster the game is even at the AHL level, and it's just going to take him some time. But all the reports I'm hearing is that they're pleased with his attitude. Like sometimes when a younger player comes up to the AHL and doesn't have success right away, he wants to blame everyone but himself. But what I'm hearing is this kid just wants to get better, and that Blashill sees him as because of that, because of his attitude, that he's going to be able to work through this, and he does have enough skill that if he figures out how it works, that he is still going to be a highly successful goal scorer, and he could still be a top-notch NHL player. Like, he has all the skill in the world. His difficulty has been just adjusting to the speed and the differences from the junior ranks to the AHL. But I've heard from a couple of sources that his attitude is very good, and they've been real impressed with how this kid wants to work, that he's not taking anything for granted, and he's not, sulking that it's not going well, that he's just putting his nose to the grindstone.
Kevin, again, now we're dealing in rumor, innuendo, and speculation, and usually we try not to do that here on the Red and White Authority. But Dylan Larkin, obviously having a good freshman year at the University of Michigan. I think he's all for Big Ten freshman in scoring. Is he long for the University of Michigan? Or do you, he might be enticed to turn pro this year, whether it's with Grand Rapids, or is he at a place now? And I haven't heard this, and I know, Kevin, you deal with everybody around the league. I mean, is he at a place now where it's not that far from a reality that he could step in perhaps next season and actually be a productive member of the Detroit Red Wings?
Well, I don't know what Dylan's doing, and I don't think the Red Wings know what Dylan's doing. But I would say that 2 seasons at Michigan will be a long collegiate career for him. Like, I think based from just me talking to pro scouts who have watched him and just getting a sense, and I'm sure Red would disagree with me on this, but they say he is going to be ready to make an impact in the NHL like next season. Like next season, he'll be ready to go. So, I think that what you would think is that he would come back and go to Michigan, and then at the end of that season, step maybe even right into the Red Wings lineup. Now, does that mean he wouldn't sign this year? I have no idea, because he's had a great season, and we've seen other players after their freshman year who are not as skilled as Dylan Larkin, sign, and then rather than come right up to the Red Wings, go to Grand Rapids, get some pro games, or and get used to it, and then maybe be an X factor. As the guy, like every year in the NHL playoffs, there's some rookie who gets thrown into the playoffs just because a coach is looking to shake it up and take advantage of some guy to give a little motivation to. So, I don't know, but I'm reasonably confident that the Red Wings don't know as at this moment, and maybe Dylan Larkin doesn't even know what he's going to do. I mean, it's got to be a difficult decision because you're still a young man. He's not ready to play in the NHL right now. Like, even if he came in, he's not going to be the Dylan Larkin we're going to see him in 4 years. Maybe he'd be better off in terms of getting just more maturity to stay another year. Like, I don't know that anybody has the answer, but all I know is that every NHL scout that I've talked to about Larkin say he's even better than we thought he was. He can be a number 1 NHL center. And when he was drafted, most scouts told me that they thought he was a number 2 center. That, you would hope he'd come in and be a number 2 center. Now they're talking about he could be a number 1 center, and that's a big jump, as we all know. It's a big difference between a number 1 center in the NHL and a number 2 center. And that puts him in the Yzerman category as opposed to the Filppula category, and that's a pretty big jump, as we all know. And everybody has just raved about him, and now all of a sudden they're talking about his leadership, and they're talking about what a great teammate he is, and how good he already is defensively, and what a smart player he is. When they start talking like that. And the comparisons I've heard is Jonathan Toews. That's the comparison. When you're getting compared to Jonathan Toews, then you've accomplished something, because he's sort of the model now for how you want a captain to be in the NHL. Jonathan Taves does everything well. He's a great leader. He's a good face-off guy. He's good defensively. He's in the Selke every year. And Larkin is a great skater as well. So, and not, you got to be old like me to remember, but when Yzerman first came in the league, that's what he was all about. I mean, he was always a breakaway waiting to happen. I've said this before, but other than Mario Lemieux, who was in a class by himself on the breakaways, the best guy I ever saw on a breakaway was Steve Yzerman. Like, he was just money on a breakaway. He would just break through, and he'd bury that shot. I wish that there are no stats on that, but I'd be confident of that he was just money on a breakaway. And Steve Yzerman had a lot of breakaways early in his career.
Well, you're right. I mean, maybe that's a stat that Stevie would like to have or wish they had, and that's certainly a stat that Chris Draper is glad that they don't have. So.
Well, and even Wayne Gretzky. Wayne was not great on breakaways. Like Gretzky was a much better goal scorer. Like now, like even I'm guilty of this, and I worship Gretzky, but we think of him as a playmaker. I always say that the Holy Trinity. Gordie Howe was the best all-around player. Wayne Gretzky was the best passer, and Mario Lemieux was the best scorer. That's how I break down the Holy Trinity of forwards. And then, Bobby Orr, if I include him, if I'm talking about all players, I say he was the most dominant player because no one quite did it the way he did. He revolutionized the game from the defense. But Wayne Gretzky, I mean, let's not forget how many goals he scored in a season. But the reason he was able to be so successful was he utilized all the traffic. That he was the best at. I mean, he could find room in a phone booth to, score a goal. Like he just could. He was just magical at using the screens and the traffic and getting the puck and finding seams. He was terrific. But everybody has a different way of scoring goals.
Right, he's almost, his anticipation, almost like a grand chess master or whatever they call it.
No, that's right. Yeah, he saw the game. The only other guy I ever saw, like Wayne Gretzky, when you talk to him after a game, he could replay. I'm sure he had a photographic memory because he could tell you where everyone was on the ice when he scored the goal. Like he could replay the goal for you in his head, and you would just write it down because back then we didn't always even have replays. And the only other player I've ever seen like that was Igor Larionov, who I remember once he got absolutely waylaid by a Czech, and afterward we were asking him about it, and he said, I think they had too many men on the ice, and everybody laughed. He said because that guy shouldn't have been there. He knew where everybody was. And everybody laughed. He goes, no. He says, I really think they had too many men on the ice. And somebody heard him, and they went back and checked the tape, and sure enough, the team had too many men on the ice. That he knew where everybody was, and he knew that guy shouldn't be there, and he was, and he got hit. So I think some players do actually have photographic memories, and they take advantage of that when they play. I think Gretzky was like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly. I always used to joke, Sergei Fedorov was the only player when you would ask him to describe the play where he scored a goal, he would go in great detail from the time he left the bench till after he scored the goal, whether he was lining up at center ice for the face-off or going back to the bench. I mean, it was all sweet, and it's odd, but if you're aware like that, then certainly you have a pretty good handle on the game.
Well, Fedorov would start with his pregame nap. I took my pregame nap, and I showed up at the rink, and he had it all laid out on how he scored a goal. Yeah, Fedorov is one of the more cerebral players, and a lot of people don't realize about him, but I know you do. Like he was a very smart, still is a very smart man. That's why he's a GM, and I enjoyed talking to him. We talked about hockey only about 40% of the time. The other 60 was world politics, or he was into a lot of different things. Same thing with Igor Larionov. My levels of conversation with him, I probably were about 20% hockey and 80% everything else.
Well, right. I mean, especially when you talk to the Russian players, especially back then from the Soviet system, they grew up quickly. They had a worldview that Americans just don't have.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. When Igor Larionov came over to this country, on the way from the airport for our first visit to Vancouver, so it was actually North America when she showed up. They stopped at a convenience store to get some drinks, and she saw, some sausages and some packaged lunch meat, and she wanted to buy it all. And they had to stop her, saying, "No, no, 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 no." And she goes, "Well, no. When in Russia, when you see meat on sale, you get it all because it won't be there tomorrow." And again, you got to remember when Igor came over, the Iron Curtain had just fallen and so forth. And then the ex says, "Well, wait till you see a supermarket." I mean, because they're at that point when they came over, there was nothing like that. In Russia.
Right. I mean, real quickly, because we're running out of time here, Ken, we're going to have to wrap it up. But I can remember from Michigan Hockey Magazine, a publication that we both have written for, they wanted me to do something on the Red Wings and how they celebrated Thanksgiving, because it's such a, Canadians celebrated it, earlier than Americans, and then the European influence. And I can remember talking to Igor about it, and it was really odd. Here, he was almost, he's in his mid-30s, I think, probably at that time. I said, "Well, how did you like Thanksgiving?" He said, "Well, it was my 8th Thanksgiving." And,
Yeah.
because, it's something we granted, and that was really the basis of the story, which turned out to be, from this little featurette about Thanksgiving, into a huge cover story about Igor Larionov and him having his 8th Thanksgiving, which he really embraced and was really into. So, I mean, and that's the thing, too. I mean, when you really look at it, and I don't want to get all philosophical here, but when you meet people from different parts of the world and you get to know them a little bit, and, you look at them more than just hockey players or people and individuals, you find out that they're multi-layered, and as I said earlier, they're just beings. It's my favorite saying from Igor Larionov, and I say it all the time. You guys look at art. We're all made from material. And and I say, yeah, you're right, Igor. I mean, the professor is the professor for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin, we're going to try this again on Friday. First of all, I want to say, I think we have some technical issues going on, so I hope people can even hear us today. I'm trying to do the system here a little bit, and I want people to know that I'm going to try to figure out this lighting and stuff, too. I am not John Boehner Jr. I do not have an orange but because I want we're going to try to figure that out. I thought it was Kevin's dogs that were in the background, and I think it's something here on my end. I don't know if you're Kevin, but it sounds kind of crazy. So hopefully you've enjoyed this episode, Kevin. We'll get back to it. One thing I really want to talk about, Mike Milbury said something during the Red Wing Bruin telecast about why is Detroit so good? Why, puck possession and all that. And he said, I think it's because of intelligence. They draft intelligent players. And I think you and I both, we can't get into it right now, but that is the key. Hockey sense is probably the #1 priority anytime the Red Wings get anybody that they're going to draft.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we will talk about that on the next program.
All right, Kevin, and then we'll look at the schedule. It's pretty daunting after the Columbus Blue Jackets on Thursday. Then they go on the road for back-to-back against Philly and Pittsburgh over the weekend, then 3 days off, and then back-to-back 2 huge games, Tampa Bay and Florida. So Red Wings have their work cut out, so we'll look at that more. Kevin, it's always a pleasure. We'll talk to you on Friday, and thanks for tuning in, everyone. This is the Red and White Authority with Art Regner and Kevin Allen. And for Kevin Allen, sayonara, see you so long. Bye-bye.